Hello and welcome to this National MS and Education and Awareness Month teleconference hosted by MS Focus, the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation, and made possible with support from EMD Serono, Genentech, Mylan, and Sanofi Genzyme. I'm your host, Catherine Bradbury, Support Groups and Outreach Manager, and I'm joined by Hollie Schmidt, who will be talking to us about MS research and why you should participate. There are going to be slides accompanying this presentation, and at the end of the presentation you will have a brief question and answer discussion. To view the slides and submit your questions via chat, please connect to the conference online. Go to readytalk.com and join with the access code 7766805. That's readytalk.com. Click join and use the access code 7766805. We encourage you to submit your questions as we go, and we will answer those questions for you at the end of the talk. Now let me introduce our speaker. Hollie Schmidt is the Vice President of Scientific Operations for Accelerated Cure Project, a patient advocacy organization that works with researchers, clinicians, and patients to accelerate research toward a cure. Part of her role involves directing the project's sample and data repository, providing researchers worldwide with access to an invaluable tool in the fight against MS. She is a member of the Research Committee for iConquer MS, a patient-powered MS research project that she will tell you more about in her presentation. She also oversees the content and community building elements of the Multiple Sclerosis Discovery Forum. Ms. Schmidt earned both a bachelor's and master's degree in material science and engineering and also a master's in management, all from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. A Mass High Tech Woman to Watch awardee, she has served on the global board of the MIT Enterprise Forum, the governing board of the MS Coalition, and the Institutional Review Board of Harvard Teaching Hospital Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. Hollie, thank you for being with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, and it's a real honor to be here. I'm very excited to be speaking about one of my favorite topics, which is research, which I hope everybody can agree is the key to better health and better quality of life for people with MS, and really for everybody. I wanted to start off with a question for the audience, and you can just think about this. What is the most important part of a research study? And the hint is it's not the researchers, it's not the research facility, it's not the funding, it's the participants. Without people willing to volunteer for research studies, we'd still be using medical techniques that we had back in the Middle Ages. We wouldn't be where we are today. So if you've participated in a research study before, thank you so much. And if you haven't yet but are curious, or you're just trying to find a research study to join, that's fantastic, and you've come to the right place because we will cover that. So tonight I'm hoping to give you a good orientation about research so that you're more knowledgeable about what it is and how it works, and also how to find opportunities to volunteer for research studies. Here's what I'd like to cover tonight in terms of topics. I've got 4 reasons to share with you for participating in MS research. I'll cover what the different types of research studies are. People often think of drug studies, but it turns out there are actually many other types of studies besides those. I'll cover what to expect as a study participant. Each study is different, but they all share some common features, and also how to find studies that are recruiting that might suit your interests. I'll talk a bit about your rights as a study participant. If you volunteer in a research study, you are making a valuable contribution, and you should be treated with the utmost respect and care. So I'll describe what you should know about your rights and also who is looking out for them. I'll also cover some questions or what-ifs that may be on your minds, and of course, I hope there'll be some time at the end to cover additional questions too. And I'll close with some useful information sources, including some of those places where you can find recruiting studies. But before we get into all of that, let's go over some terms that are often used when talking about research. This is all pretty standard medical research jargon, and I find that when I'm learning something new, it's really helpful if the jargon is explained up front. So if you'll just bear with me while I cover some of these terms, I think they'll be helpful later. So first of all, you may have a general sense of what research means, and you've taken science classes and things like that, but there's a specific term, clinical research, that's often used, and that just means research involving humans, not animals or cells or astronomy or things like that. Another common term is clinical trial. When you hear the word trial, some people think of a courtroom and a legal trial or a legal case, but in research, a trial means a study involving interventions. Okay, so what's an intervention? An intervention is something that can be done or given to affect someone's health. This can include medicines, medical devices, things like physical therapy, surgical procedures, and so on. Some studies compare an intervention to another intervention, then that one is called a control, and that can be another similar treatment, or it could be a placebo. And you might have heard of placebo before, or the placebo effect. And a placebo is simply a treatment that has no physical effect. So if you're comparing a drug to a placebo, the placebo is going to be like a sugar pill or a saline solution. It doesn't really have much effect in the body. And it's sometimes used when there's no similar treatment that can be used to compare against. But anyway, you have often an intervention, and if you do, you might have a control, just so you can see if the new intervention is better than the standard one. A different type of study from a clinical trial is an observational study. And this is a study in which the researchers aren't giving people interventions, but rather they're observing them through some type of measurement. That could be through administering a survey, it could be through lab tests, or it could be as simple as just looking in their medical records. Informed consent is very important, and we'll cover this a couple of times tonight. But basically, it refers to the research telling a potential participant what they need to know about a study so that they can decide whether to participate in it. By and large, people cannot be enrolled in studies without their knowledge and their permission. There are some exceptions to this, but for the most part, people who might want to volunteer for a study will have a chance to learn about the study and will be able to make their own decision. So this process of telling about the study and then deciding whether or not to be in the study is what is referred to as informed consent. A protocol is a detailed document, a full written description of the study that researchers have to develop in order to get approval for the study from their administrators, at their hospital or other facility, as well as other authorities. So before they can take the first step in research, they have to think through and then write down all of the study details. This includes why they want to do the study, what will happen in the study, how they're going to analyze the data, what are the risks of participation, and so on. So it's a very important and key document for any type of research. And then finally, most studies will have a principal investigator, and investigator sounds a bit like detective, but actually this is the term that's used for the lead researcher for the project. And then many studies will also have a research coordinator who carries out the day-to-day activities for the study and keeps the details of the study well organized. So if you're involved in a study, you may actually have quite a bit of interaction with the research coordinator, depending on how it's set up. I hope that review of the jargon was useful. I'd like to now share some reasons why you might want to participate in an MS research study. And the first one has to do with the value of the knowledge that research studies generate. Chances are that you yourself have benefited in some way from the results of previous studies. For instance, if you're on any type of medicine for your MS, whether that's a disease-modifying therapy or it's a treatment for some of your symptoms, that medicine had to go through several clinical trials before it became available. I should also point out that there has also been clinical trials showing that certain drugs do not work in MS. These trials are sometimes called failures, but I actually consider them a success because they have kept people from taking medicines that wouldn't be helpful or might be harmful. If you've ever had an MRI to diagnose or track your MS, that was because prior research demonstrated that MRI was a useful method and a better method than, say, X-rays or things like that for looking at MS lesions. There have also been some research studies on alternative therapies like acupuncture, meditation, CBD products, things like that, and more are underway because there is a great deal of interest in those types of therapies. I'd like to call out exercise specifically. People with MS used to be told not to exercise because it was thought to be harmful for them. But because of research studies on MS and exercise, we now know that exercise is actually helpful for people with MS when performed in the right way. And so now people with MS are exercising, which is good not just for their MS and their brain health, but also their heart health and their mood and just their all-around health in general. So that was, that was good to find out through research. I'd also like to mention diet. Diet is a topic that many, many people are interested in. Everybody wants to know what they should be eating to manage their MS. Diet is tougher to study because there's such a wide variety of food and eating habits out there, and it's really hard to control what people eat unless you can make them live in a facility where they can only eat what's put in front of them, and that's really, a lot of people aren't going to be interested in signing up for that type of thing. But diet is not impossible to study. And in fact, if you've heard of the Walls diet, you might be interested to know that there's a study of it going on right now that the MS Society is funding. So hopefully in a matter just of a few years, we'll have some evidence about how well that diet works for MS. And then finally, there's research that has to do with how healthcare is conducted or delivered. And the results of these studies can also make a big difference in people's lives. For example, we're involved in a study that's looking into the effects of telemedicine, which means visiting your healthcare provider over the phone or by video conference instead of going to their office. And if it turns out that this is beneficial, then this might help more people access healthcare without having to travel long distances or arrange for complicated transportation. Or, even sometimes just getting out of the house is a hard thing for people. So that could be very beneficial. So to sum up, the first important reason to consider participating in research is that you can help improve the outlook for people with MS in the future, and this perhaps includes yourself as well. Another important MS research goal is preventing MS from happening in the future. There are studies going on now that are looking for genes and other factors that influence who develops MS and who doesn't. There are other studies that are monitoring people who are at risk of MS to see if they can detect early signs of the disease in them. It's very possible that in the future, because of these studies, we'll be able to intervene early in the process and stop the disease in its tracks before it can cause any harm and potentially prevent anybody from getting MS in the future. The next reason is for people belonging to minority groups who want to make sure that research benefits their community. It's an unfortunate fact that minority groups are typically underrepresented in research studies. And on the slide here, I have a couple of charts which are from 2 recent clinical trials for an MS drug, and it shows the racial and ethnic breakdown of the participants. The print on your screen might be really small, but you can probably tell just from looking at the colored sections that Caucasians, who are in blue, make up over 90% of all the participants. So as a result, we don't have that much information about how the drug worked in African Americans or Native Americans or other groups. The drug can still be prescribed to all groups, but the evidence behind using it is much less for minority groups. So this trial is sadly not unusual, and most studies are imbalanced like this in terms of who they enroll. So my organization has been working with other groups and individuals for the past couple of years to study this problem. Why is it that we have this lack of diversity in clinical research? And we've reached out to researchers as well as healthcare providers who can have conversations with their patients about research participation to make them aware that this issue exists and the problems that it causes. We'd also like to encourage people with MS who belong to minority groups to especially consider participating in research. Ideally, we can all start to correct this imbalance so that all communities can take equal advantage of the research findings that are generated in the future. And then last but not least, bringing it to you as an individual, one final reason to participate in a research study is because it might benefit you personally. For example, if there's a study of a new treatment that looks like it might be better in some way, it might be more effective, or how it gets administered is more convenient, or it can affect a symptom that you're having a problem with, you could get access to it before it becomes widely available. You could also get access to free or lower cost health care during the time of the study. Generally, the care that is provided in the study is typically or often done for free. Likewise, you could get more frequent and thorough healthcare visits than you normally would because the clinical study needs checking in more often than you get checked in for regular healthcare. And then finally, you could come away from the study with knowledge that you didn't have before, either about MS and how to treat it or your own health status. But it's important to remember that along with possible benefits of a research study, there often are risks associated with it as well, and it's important to pay attention to those risks and make sure that they're reasonable, meaning that you can accept them relative to any benefits of the study. So hopefully I've given you some good reasons to find a study that you might like to join. And the next question is, if I can get the slide to change over. Next question is, what types of studies are there? There may be more than you think or that you know about. This first graphic has to do with clinical drug trials, which are a very common type of study. These are done in phases. You might have heard of phase 1 or phase 2 trials, and this is what that refers to. They start small, and then they grow larger over time. So the first type is phase 1 studies. This is the first time that a new drug is used in a human being. Often these human beings are young and healthy adults. So they don't have other issues that could be potentially affected by the drug. Really, the study is just looking to make sure that the drug is safe and doesn't have any immediate harms that they can tell. That's phase 1 study. If a drug passes the phase 1 study, then it goes on to phase 2. Phase 2 has slightly more participants, maybe a couple of hundred. And this is usually the first time that the drug is used in the intended population. And now we skipped ahead. There we go. Such as people with MS. The purpose of a phase 2 trial is to make sure that the drug is safe, like before, plus get some indication of whether it's effective for treating MS. Plus, sometimes there's a potential comparison of different doses. So some people in the study might be on one dose, and another group of people might be on a different dose to see which one seems to be the most effective and yet still safe. Often, phase 2 trials in MS last a few months, and they use MRI activity to get that early answer about whether it's going to be effective against MS. So that's a phase 2 trial. Phase 3 trials are the ones that make the news. They're the ones where we finally get an answer about whether this drug is likely to succeed and come to market for MS. A phase 3 trial in MS especially, has thousands of participants. It includes many different sites in different countries all over the world. Generally, in MS, people in a phase 3 trial are in the drug for up to 2 years. But sometimes for longer. If the drug has a follow-on phase, then people might just continue staying in the study and continuing to take the drug for a longer period of time. The phase 3 trial for MS will often use relapses or changes in disability. So beyond MRI lesions, now they're looking at things that you would notice to determine whether the drug works in MS. And it also continues to look at safety. Because these are longer studies, sometimes issues become apparent in a phase 3 trial that weren't seen in the shorter phase 1 and 2 trials. So it's really important that these trials pay close attention to any side effects or illnesses or things like that that happen to the people in a phase 3 trial. And then, like I said, importantly, phase 3 trials provide the data that the FDA and other countries' regulatory groups use to decide whether it can be offered in the U.S. and other countries. And then finally, after the FDA review and approval, a drug might actually also have some phase 4 studies. These happen because earlier studies weren't able to answer all the questions that either the pharmaceutical company that's offering the drug or the FDA wanted to know. So the company might launch one or more phase 4 studies to look at the drug's effect in different groups of people, or they might look at its outcomes on other kinds of measures that weren't used in the previous studies, such as, does this drug help improve energy levels or people's ability to think or their memory or things like that. So that's another study that's, I won't say they're common, but they're sometimes used. So that covers drug studies. But what if you're happy with the drug that you're on and you don't want to switch? Or what if you just don't want to be on a drug or you can't be on a drug for some reason? Well, there's still trials of therapies that you can be on that involve non-drug therapies. And I've included the logos for 2 here on the slide that we are involved with at my organization. One is called Step for MS, and it's a trial that's happening at 7 different sites in the United States. And it's an exercise therapy trial. So it's enrolling people with MS who have some difficulty walking. Half of them, more or less, are going to a rehab facility or some other type of facility, meeting with an exercise coach face-to-face, and then doing their exercise at the facility, and that involves treadmill, walking, and resistance exercises. The other half are meeting with their coach, not face-to-face, but instead over the phone or over video conference, and they're doing their exercises at home or in their community. And again, it's walking and resistance exercises. So the same exercise program, the same type of coaching, the difference is the location. And so the study investigators are looking at, is it just as good to do your exercise and get your coaching at home versus in the facility? And if so, that might make it easier for people to get on board with an exercise program and follow it. Another study is called Healthy Mind, Healthy You. And that is a study that will be comparing what's called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And it's kind of similar to meditation, but not quite the same. It involves an internet-delivered intervention, so it's basically classes and then practice exercises that you can do at one's convenience using the internet. And we're participating in this study with our research community, I Conquer MS, and so are a lot of other research communities with people with other health conditions. What the study will involve is comparing a 3-week session of mindfulness versus an 8-week session, and the goal is to reduce stress. And a really interesting aspect of this study is that it's not only enrolling people with MS or people with health conditions, but also their care partners or their caregivers, their friends, their families who take care of them if they want to enroll as well, because these people also often can experience stress and might want to try mindfulness. So those are some clinical trials that don't involve drugs that are actually, fairly open. I think Healthy Mind, Healthy You will be open to pretty much anybody who wants to join. But, you still might not want to have an intervention, but you still want to contribute to research and are willing to be tested in some way. So then you could join a measurement-based study. For instance, you could provide a blood or saliva sample for analysis. You could get some MRI scans, or you could wear an activity monitor for a while, those kinds of things. These activities help researchers learn more about what causes MS, how to diagnose it more accurately, how to monitor it, to look for early signs of disease activity and stuff like that. The example I've given here, this is the logo for the Alliance for Research in Hispanic MS, and they are doing genetic research and other types of research to better understand how MS affects Hispanic individuals. There's no intervention, but they're learning valuable information about the experience of Hispanic people who have MS, and they would love for people who belong to this group to join up, to sign up to help. And then a couple more types of things you can do besides those kinds of studies. One of the easiest types of studies for most people to join is one that involves filling out surveys. Usually these can be done over the internet, and they can cover a variety of topics. They're simple, but they can also be very important to help understand how people are managing their MS as well as the effects of MS on their lives. And this example I've included here is from the Oregon Health and Science University, looking at the different types of treatments that people with MS are using. So it's complementary to a clinical trial of a drug that's helping us learn about MS treatments, and this is a survey study that's also helping us learn about MS treatments. And then finally, there are opportunities to participate in research that go beyond a single study. For example, there are biobanks where you contribute blood or urine or stool samples or other kinds of biological samples that then get banked and then sent out to multiple researchers, perhaps to different countries around the world for a variety of studies, learning about MS in more detail and possibly finding markers of disease. I've also included I Conquer MS on this slide. This is an activity of my organization, and it's a research community that people can register once in and then be invited to participate in different opportunities as they come up. Some of these opportunities are research studies, such as the Healthy Mind, Healthy You study that I just mentioned, and that will be starting soon, so we'll be starting to let our members know how they can join. Some of them involve providing input to research studies that are being planned so that they can be made easy to participate in for people with MS, or they can be designed to provide useful information to people with MS. So joining I Conquer MS is an easy way to learn about new things that are going on and then decide which you want to help out with. So those are some of the different types of research studies, and hopefully one or more of these seem like something that you might like to try. Switching gears a little bit, I'd like to provide some information about what to expect as a study participant. I think it's always good when trying something new to have some idea about what will happen. Any given study might involve a variety of different activities, but here are some of the general categories that you'll see. At the beginning of the process is informed consent, which I talked about already. It's where you learn about the study and then you decide if it's something you want to do. Kind of happening around the same time is also a screening process where you may be asked questions or you may undergo some kind of lab tests, or they might look at your medical records to see if you qualify for the study. And the informed consent might precede screening, or there might be some consent, then some screening, and then some more consent, and then some screening, just depending on how the study is set up. But these things have to happen first. And basically, this whole process is just based on determining whether the study is right for you and then whether you're right for the study also. Then you get to the study eligibility determination, and that's where the investigators look at the results and see if you meet all the criteria. If you do and you have agreed to be in the study, then there may be a randomization process. I mentioned before that some studies have interventions, and they don't just have that intervention that's being studied, but they have a control. That case, they need people to take the intervention, and they need other people to take the control intervention. And what they might do is randomize. So they randomly assign some people to treatment A and some people to treatment B. And that's a way of making sure that it's a fair test between the two. Sometimes, if you're randomized, you will be told, you're randomized to treatment A. But often you're not, and that's because you might have expectations that treatment A might be better than treatment B, and that expectation might actually affect the measurements that are taken during the study. So oftentimes you might be randomized, and then you have to wait possibly until the entire study is over to find out which treatment you were on. Often also your investigator doesn't know which treatment you're on, but if there's some kind of emergency and this information has to be determined, then there's a way to contact the people at the sponsor and find out whether you were on treatment A or treatment B, because that might make a difference in your follow-up care. After randomization, if that happens, then there's the whole range of study activities, and this varies quite a bit depending on the study. As I mentioned, it could involve intervention. It could involve measurements of different kinds. It could be very short. It could be an hour. I took a study once, and it was a study of a cognitive device, and I think I just did a bunch of cognitive tests, paper and pencil and memory tests and things like that, and I was in and out in an hour, but I had the informed consent and the screening and all of that stuff as well. Or it could, take up to several years, like, in the case of a phase 3 clinical trial. So the activities and the duration can widely vary. Sometimes after the intervention phase, there's even another phase of study activities that is called the follow-up phase. So if you've done an intervention and the intervention stops, so you stop the drug, you stop the device, you stop the exercise period, and now the investigators want to know, does this intervention have a lasting effect? Or they want to know, are there any side effects that might become apparent later that, we just need to wait a little bit longer? Then they may ask to follow you for a period of weeks or months after the intervention phase is done. And then finally, after all of that, we come to the results phase. And this is where the research team takes all of the data from the study and analyzes it, and then, finds out the answer to the research question or questions that they were interested in answering. And then it's up to them to communicate these results to the world. Usually that involves communicating them to their peers, whether they're researchers or healthcare providers, at conferences, in medical journals. Sometimes study results make it into the popular press, like newspapers or TV news shows and things like that. But not often. Most studies don't make it to be quite that popular. But they do get published for the most part, and the scientific community can learn. I personally hope that if you join a study, you participate in it, you do what you do, that you yourself also get to see what the results of the study are. I think that's part of treating participants with the respect that they deserve. And I think that's a fair question to ask. If you're talking with an investigator about a potential study, you can ask, will I get to hear what the results of the study are afterwards, and how will you tell me, or do I need to check in? But I know that when I participate in a study, I'm very curious, not just about, my own participation, but what they found. I was interested enough to join it. I must be interested enough in the research question, and I think people have a right to know. So speaking of rights, this takes us to the next slide, about your rights as a study participant. Basically, you are not a guinea pig. They're cute and they're great, but you are a human and you have certain rights. And actually, I should say guinea pigs do have certain rights too. They're taken care of. There's ethics surrounding guinea pigs, but you as a human have even more rights than that. And you should know about them. Here are some of those rights. First of all, you have the right to be fully informed about the research study. And this goes into the informed consent process a lot. You get to know why the study is being performed. You get to know what are the potential risks of participation, if there are any potential side effects of an intervention. You also need to be told about what the potential benefits are to yourself primarily, but also to others. You should be told how the medical care, if this is a study involving medical care, differs from any standard care you might just receive as part of, your normal MS care. You might decide after hearing that the standard care is actually going to be better for you. So you have to be able to make that comparison. And then also, again, in the nature of comparison, you have to be told what are the other available options to participating in the study. And oftentimes, especially if it's for a more major study, you will get a document called an informed consent form that covers all of this in detail. And you get a copy of it, and you get to bring it home, look at it over time, refer back to it if you need to. But you also will typically have a conversation with the study team to make sure that you can get your questions answered. And you do have a right to ask any questions you want to about the study. And the researcher should be happy to answer them as fully as they can. If they don't seem interested in answering your questions, then I think that's a red flag, and you should think about whether that's the right study for you. You have the right to consult with your family and your healthcare providers. Especially if you have healthcare providers that aren't part of the study, you can take this information back to them and see what they think. Is this a good option for you, or is it a potential problem for you? You can consult with anybody you want to. You can consult with your friends or your religious advisors or anybody. You should never feel rushed into making a decision. You should take your time, whatever time you need. And then finally, ultimately, it's your right to provide consent or withhold consent to participate. It's your choice alone. If the researcher is your doctor, and that often is the case, you're in a visit with your doctor and he or she says, hey, I've got a study, would you like to join it? And you say no, that decision should not affect how your doctor treats you as a patient going forward, okay? It should not affect that. So these are some of your rights. You have more, but I think these are some of the important ones that I wanted to cover. And I also wanted to mention that your rights as a research participant are so important that there are special committees set up to protect those rights. These committees are called IRBs, or Institutional Review Boards, and their job is to protect the rights, the welfare, and the well-being of human research participants. My bio mentioned that I serve on an IRB for a hospital in Boston, and I can tell you that I and my fellow board members take this job very seriously. One of the things we get to do is review each of the clinical studies that the researchers at the hospitals want to conduct. One key question we always ask is, do the benefits of the study outweigh the risks? If not, we reject the study, or we send it back to the researcher for revision if we think that the imbalance can be addressed. Sometimes people who are enrolled in a study, they're partway through, they have a concern, but they, for some reason, don't want to go to the researchers with it. For that reason, many research sites will have people designated who are not involved with the study, but that you can contact if you have these types of concerns, and they will take them up and deal with them. And often this will be listed in the consent materials that you can refer to while you're in the middle of the study. Okay, moving on. As I mentioned, I do have some questions, and I would love to have more questions after the talk. But here are some questions you might have about research participation, or what if. So what if you join a study, but then you change your mind? That is absolutely okay. You can change your mind. You can leave a study at any time for any reason. It is okay. It is much better, and the research team much prefers if you will tell them that you're leaving the study, contact them and say, hey, I can't do it anymore, I'm moving, or I'm too busy, or I don't like this drug, or whatever the reason is. And they will, they might give you a couple options for how you leave the study, but you will be able to leave the study. Please don't just ignore their outreach. Don't ignore their phone calls or their emails. Don't ghost them. They really do need to know that you are no longer going to be participating. What if you become injured or ill as a result of the study? This can happen. The risks should be spelled out in the consent process. And the consent process and the consent form should also spell out what might happen if these risks occurred, especially injury and illness that require medical treatment. So how you receive that treatment, and importantly, who will cover the cost of that treatment, should be covered in the document. The study might provide for your medical care, and the sponsor might provide for your medical care, but you should be aware, because there might be some circumstances when that wouldn't happen. So, make sure to read the language in the consent form. And always ask the study investigator during the consent process if this isn't clear. A question that we often get is, I don't qualify for studies. My age exceeds the upper limits that they're looking for, or I have other health conditions, or I have the wrong type of MS for the study, or there's other factors that disqualify me. That often happens. studies often have inclusion-exclusion criteria, and those are for reasons. Sometimes they're safety-related. So if you have, for example, a heart condition and the study drug might affect your heartbeat, then you probably won't qualify for that study because you're at extra risk for a cardiac problem to develop. Oftentimes, the eligibility criteria are based on the ability of a treatment to demonstrate treatment effects. They want to show that the treatment is going to do something. So, for example, if the study is looking at a drug's ability to reduce relapses, they're going to be looking for people who have had recent relapses. They won't be looking for people who have been stable for a long time. So that kind of thing can also exclude you from a study. But the good news is there are plenty of other kinds of studies, those involving registries, or there are actually studies that are looking at aging and MS and things like that might address the particular concern that gets you excluded from, another study might be the factor that makes you very useful for a different study. So keep an open mind, and just, if you're interested in contributing to research, there will be other opportunities for you. And then finally, this is another common concern. What if I'm too busy? What if you're too busy to visit the clinic multiple times? I said before that a possible benefit of some studies was more frequent and thorough medical care. This can be somewhat of a downside if you're employed, you're taking care of children, or you otherwise find it difficult to get to all the required visits. Good news is some studies are starting to offer home-based services, like they will send a nurse to your house to draw your blood or conduct a walking test with you. This is still kind of new, but as sponsors are finding it harder and harder to enroll people because they're busy, they're looking for ways to make it more convenient. So this is, I think, a trend of the future. And then, of course, you can look for studies that either don't involve clinic visits at all or just involve one or two that you can work into your schedule. So that covers some questions, and now we've made it to the last topic, and I really appreciate your staying with me this far. Hopefully you're motivated to contribute to the MS Knowledge Base by volunteering for a research study. And now the question is, where can you go to find one? And here are a bunch of resources that you could go to find the study that works for you. The first one is MS Focus, which has teamed up with CenterWatch. And this is a site that has a number of really great research resources, including a link to a site that lists MS trials. So that's a good place to check out. The National MS Society has a page that lists different research opportunities, and these are broken out into categories. So if you want a clinical trial, there's a category for that. There's one for genetic studies. There's one for surveys, so you can sort of get to the category that you're most interested in. The MS Association of America has a site. They've also partnered with another organization, and what this one does is it asks you a set of questions about where you live, what is your age, etc., and then it gives you a personalized list of open trials. There's a company called Smart Patients that hosts communities for different health conditions, and they have one for multiple sclerosis where you can chat with other people and share information. But then they also have a side of the site that has information about clinical trials. And at their site, they have a search box, and you can type in a condition like MS, and then it shows you a list of all the trials that they have in their database that are recruiting, and then you can click on different filters to narrow it down from there. There's clinicaltrials.gov, and I call this the big daddy of trial databases. It's a huge database of trials conducted all over the world, all kinds of clinical trials, all health conditions, and you can search it, which is good, because it's a huge database and you need to be able to search it for the things you're interested in. So there are filters there, and if you work with it, you can find things that meet your interests. But I will say that I think some of the other sites that are on this list might be a little bit more user-friendly to start with. Research Match is a little bit different. It matches volunteers with studies who are seeking participants. So if you go to Research Match and create an account, you tell them a little bit about yourself, and then every now and then they'll send you an invitation, an email about a study that you might want to join. So basically the studies are coming to you versus you going to them or going out to find them. And when you get that email invitation, you can either click through to tell the research team that you're interested, or you can just ignore the email or delete it. It's up to you. And I belong to Research Match. I've joined a number of studies this way. I've done a study on sleep habits, on memory, on other things. I've done a genetic test where the nurse came out and drew my blood at my house. So it's a really great way of learning about studies that might be interesting. And again, you can always just ignore anyone that doesn't seem to be that perfect for you. I mentioned I Conquer MS before. This is my organization's research community where you can register and then learn about different research opportunities, such as the Healthy Mind, Healthy You study, as well as our own study called Real MS. And then the last bullet has a link. It's a page that has a link to research opportunities that might be of particular interest to people belonging to minority groups. So if that's you, you might want to check this out and see if there's something in there that meets your interest, because these studies would love to have you help them out. So I hope that some of you might be interested in checking out some of these resources for more information. And I hope this presentation has been helpful overall. To sum up, there are lots of researchers out there. A lot of studies never succeed because not enough people join, and so they never meet their goals. So there are a lot of studies out there that are looking for participants like you that would be delighted if you reached out to them. So please think about finding one that works for you, meets your interests, and meets your schedule and all of that other stuff. And also, please feel free to email me. I've put my email here. If you have any questions or thoughts or feedback for me after tonight, I would definitely like to hear from you about that. So that wraps up my presentation, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, and as a reminder, if anybody would like to ask a question, they can connect online, go to readytalk.com, click Join Meeting, and use the access code 7766805. And if you're already online and you have a question for Hollie, you can use the blue online chat button to submit a question now.
What are the typical age limits? Yeah, good question. It depends on the type of study, but typically for things like clinical drug trials, usually it's between 18 and 55, sometimes 18 and 65. But they don't want pediatric patients because that's a different category, and there's also different different ethical rules and different procedures that have to be followed when you enroll children or teenagers. And then they set the upper age limits for a variety of reasons. As I mentioned, safety is an issue, so people who are above a certain age may be more likely to have other health conditions, but also they just may have a less relapsing form of the disease, and so it might be more difficult to see the effect of a drug in older people. But this is something we often hear from people who are over 55 or over 65. They get very discouraged that they can't participate in research, and I certainly understand that. And we try to help them find other things that they can do, because there are many other types of studies that you can join regardless of your age. Well, thank you all for being on tonight. I hope this was useful information. And again, happy to hear from you by email, so please reach out. And I hope you all have a great night.
Yes, thank you so much, Hollie. And if you missed any part of the teleconference, it will be replayed on msfocusradio.org and available on demand. You can follow MS Focus on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for times and access information. Our teleconference series will continue on March 19th when we team up with representatives from the Partnership to Improve Patient Care to discuss how to become an advocate, and we hope you will join us then. Our most sincere thanks to our sponsors for their support of National MS Education and Awareness Month, to all of our callers for your participation, and especially to Hollie Schmidt. Thank you so much for your time that you spent to prepare and share this information with us.